Chapter 18 of Just David. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. Chapter 18, David to the Rescue. It was a beautiful moonlit night, but for once David was not thinking of the moon. All the way to the Holly farmhouse he was thinking of Mr. Jack's story, The Princess and the Pauper. It held him strangely. He felt that he never could forget it. For some reason that he could not have explained, it made him sad, too, and his step was very quiet as he went up the walk toward the kitchen door. It was after 8 o'clock. David had taken supper with Mr. Jack and Jill, and not for some hours had he been at the farmhouse. In the doorway now he stopped short. Then instinctively he stepped back into the shadow. In the kitchen a kerosene light was burning. It showed Mrs. Holly crying at the table, and Mr. Holly, white-faced and stern-lipped, staring at nothing. Then Mrs. Holly raised her face, drawn and tear-stained, and asked a trembling question. "Simeon, have you thought we might go to John for help?" David was frightened then. So angry was the look that came into Simeon Holly's face. "Ellen will have no more of this," said the man harshly. "Understand, I'd rather lose the whole thing and starve than to go to John." David fled then. Up the back stairs he crept to his room, and left his violin. A moment later he stole down again and sought Perry Larson, whom he had seen smoking in the barn doorway. "Perry, what is it?" he asked in a trembling voice. "What has happened in there?" He pointed toward the house. The man puffed for a moment in silence before he took his pipe from his mouth. "Well, sonny, I s'pose I may as well tell ye. You'll have ter know it sometime, seein' as 'twon't be no secret long. They've had a stroke o' bad luck, Mr. and Mrs. Holly has." "What is it?" The man hitched in his seat. "By sugar, boy, I s'pose if I tell ye, there ain't no sartinty that you'll sense it at all. I reckon it ain't in your class." "But what is it?" "Well, it's money, and one might as well talk moonshine to you as money, I s'pose. But here goes it. It's $1,000, boy, that they owed. Here, like this," he explained, rummaging his pockets until he found a silver dollar to lay on his open palm. "Now, just imagine 1,000 of them. That's heaps and heaps, more'n I'll ever see in my life." "Like the stars?" guessed David. The man nodded. "Exactly. Well, they owed this, Mr. and Mrs. Holly did, and they had agreed ter pay it next Saturday. And they was all right, too. They had it plumb saved in the bank, and was goin' ter draw it Thursday ter make sure. And they was feelin' mighty pert over it, too, when ter day along comes the news that somethin's broke kersmash in that bank, and they've shet it up, and nary a cent can the Hollys git now, and maybe never. Anyhow, not 'fore it's too late for this job." "But won't he wait, that man they owe it to? I should think he'd have to, if they didn't have it to pay." "Not much he will, when it's old Streeter that's got the mortgage on a good fat farm like this." David drew his brows together perplexedly. "What is a mortgage?" he asked. "Is it anything like a porte cochere?" "I know what that is, 'cause my Lady of the Roses has one, and we haven't got that down here." Perry Larson sighed in exasperation. "Gosh! If that ain't 'bout what I expected of ye! No, it ain't even second cousin to a thing that you're a talkin' of. In plain wordin', it's jest this: Mr. Holly, he says ter Streeter, 'You give me $1,000, and I'll pay ye back on a sartin day. If I don't pay, you can sell my farm for what it'll bring, and take your pay.' Well, now, here 'tis. Mr. Holly can't pay, and so Streeter will put up the farm for sale." "What? With Mr. and Mrs. Holly living here?" "Sure. Only they'll have ter get out, you know." "Where'll they go?" "The Lord knows. I don't." "And is that what they're crying for in there? Because they've got to go?" "Sure." "But isn't there anything anywhere that can be done to stop it?" "I don't see how, kid. Not unless some one ponies up with money 'fore next Saturday, and 1,000 of them things don't grow on every bush," he finished, gently patting the coin in his hand. At the words a swift change came to David's face. His cheeks paled, and his eyes dilated in terror. It was as if ahead of him he saw a yawning abyss, eager to engulf him. "And you say money would fix it?" he asked thickly. "Exactly. 1,000 of them, though, 'twould take." A dawning relief came in David's eyes. It was as if he saw a bridge across the abyss. "You mean that there wouldn't anything do, only silver pieces like those?" he questioned hopefully. "Sugar, kid, 'course there would. Gosh, but you be a checkerboard o' sense and nonsense, and no mistake. Any money would do the job. Any money, don't you see? Anything that's money." "Would gold do it? Would gold do it?" David's voice was very faint now. "Sure! Gold or silver or greenbacks or a check, if it had the dough behind it." David did not appear to hear the last. With an oddly strained look he had hung upon the man's first words, but at the end of the sentence he only muttered, "Oh, thank you," and turned away. He was walking slowly now toward the house. His head was bowed. His step lagged. "Now ain't that just like that chap," muttered the man, "ter slink off like that, as if he was a whipped cur. I'll bet 2 cents and a doughnut, too, that in 5 minutes he'll be what he calls playin' it on that 'ere fiddle o' his. And I'll be durned, too, if I ain't curious ter see what he will make of it. It strikes me this ought ter fetch somethin' first cousin to a dirge." On the porch steps David paused a breathless instant. From the kitchen came the sound of Mrs. Holly's sobs and of a stern voice praying. With a shudder and a little choking cry the boy turned then and crept softly upstairs to his room. He played, too, as Perry Larson had wagered. But it was not the tragedy of the closed bank, nor the horror of the threatened farm selling that fell from his violin. It was, instead, the swan song of a little pile of gold gold which now lay in a chimney cupboard, but which was soon to be placed at the feet of the mourning man and woman downstairs. And in the song was the sob of a boy who sees his house of dreams burned to ashes, who sees his wonderful life and work out in the wide world turned to endless days of weed pulling and dirt digging in a narrow valley. There was in the song, too, something of the struggle, the fierce yea and nay of the conflict, but at the end there was the wild burst of exultation, of renunciation, so that the man in the barn door below fairly sprang to his feet with an angry, "Gosh, if he hain't turned the thing into a jig, durn him! Don't he know more'n that at such a time as this?" Later, a very little later, the shadowy figure of the boy stood before him. "I've been thinking," stammered David, "that maybe I could help about that money, you know." "Now, look a here, boy," exploded Perry in open exasperation. "As I said in the first place, this ain't in your class. 'Tain't no pink cloud sailin' in the sky, nor a bluebird singin' in a blackberry bush, and you might play it, as you call it, till doomsday, and 'twouldn't do no good, though I'm free ter confess that your playin' of them 'ere other things sound real pert and chirky at times. But 'twon't do no good here." David stepped forward, bringing his small, anxious face full into the moonlight. "But 'twas the money, Perry, I meant about the money," he explained. "They were good to me and wanted me when there wasn't any one else that did. and now I'd like to do something for them. There aren't so many pieces, and they aren't silver. There's only 106 of them, I counted, but maybe they'd help some. It would be a start." His voice broke over the once beloved word, then went on with renewed strength. "There, see! Would these do?" And with both hands he held up to view his cap sagging under its weight of gold. Perry Larson's jaw fell open. His eyes bulged. Dazedly he reached out and touched with trembling fingers the heap of shining disks that seemed in the mellow light like little earth-born children of the moon itself. The next instant he recoiled sharply. "Great snakes, boy, where'd you get that money?" he demanded. "Of father. He went to the far country, you know." Perry Larson snorted angrily. "See here, boy, for once, if you can talk horse sense, surely even you don't expect me to believe that he's sent you that money from where he's gone to." "Oh, no, he left it." "Left it? Why, boy, you know better. There weren't a cent hardly found on him." "He gave it to me before, by the roadside." "Give it to you? Where in the name of goodness has it been since?" "In the little cupboard in my room, behind the books." "Great snakes!" muttered Perry Larson, reaching out his hand and gingerly picking up one of the gold pieces. David eyed him anxiously. "Won't they do?" he faltered. "There aren't 1,000. There's only 106. But—" "Do?" cut in the man, excitedly. He had been examining the gold pieces at close range. "Do? Well, I reckon they'll do. By Jiminy, and to think you've had this up your sleeve all this time! Well, I'll believe anythin' of yer now, anythin'. You can't stump me with nothin'. Come on, now." And he hurriedly led the way toward the house. "But they weren't up my sleeve," corrected David, as he tried to keep up with the long strides of the man. "I said they were in the cupboard in my room." There was no answer. Larson had reached the porch steps, and had paused there hesitatingly. From the kitchen still came the sound of sobs. Aside from that, there was silence. The boy, however, did not hesitate. He went straight up the steps and through the open kitchen door. At the table sat the man and the woman, their eyes covered with their hands. With a swift overturning of his cap, David dumped his burden onto the table. He stepped back respectfully. "If you please, sir, would this help any?" he asked. At the jingle of the coin, Simeon Holly and his wife lifted their heads abruptly. A half-uttered sob died on the woman's lips. A quick cry came from the man's. He reached forth an eager hand and had almost clutched the gold, when a sudden change came to his face. With a stern ejaculation he drew back. "Boy, where did that money come from?" he challenged. David sighed in a discouraged way. It seemed that always the showing of this gold meant questioning, eternal questioning. "Surely," continued Simeon Holly, "you did not—" With the boy's frank gaze upturned to his, the man could not finish his sentence. Before David could answer came the voice of Perry Larson from the kitchen doorway. "No, sir, he didn't, Mr. Holly, and it's all straight, I'm thinkin', though I'm free ter confess it does sound nutty. His dad give it to him." "His father? But where has it been ever since?" "In the chimney cupboard in his room, he says, sir." Simeon Holly turned in frowning amazement. "David, what does this mean? Why have you kept this gold in a place like that?" "Why, there wasn't anything else to do with it," answered the boy perplexedly. "I hadn't any use for it, you know, and father said to keep it till I needed it." "Hadn't any use for it!" blustered Larson from the doorway. "Jiminy! Now, ain't that just like that boy?" But David hurried on with his explanation. "We never used to use them, father and I, except to buy things to eat and wear. And down here you give me those, you know." "Gorry!" interjected Perry Larson. "Do you reckon, boy, that Mr. Holly himself was give them things he gives to you?" The boy turned sharply, a startled question in his eyes. "What do you mean? Do you mean that—" His face changed suddenly. His cheeks turned a shamed red. "Why, he did. He did have to buy them, of course, just as father did. And I never even thought of it before. Then it's yours, anyway. It belongs to you," he argued, turning to Farmer Holly and shoving the gold nearer his hands. "There isn't enough, maybe, but 'twill help." "They're $10 gold pieces, sir," spoke up Larson, importantly, "and there's 106 of 'em. That's just $1,060 as I make it." Simeon Holly, self-controlled man that he was, almost leaped from his chair. $1,060!" he gasped. Then to David, "Boy, in heaven's name, who are you?" "I don't know. Only David." The boy spoke wearily, with a grieved sob in his voice. He was very tired, a good deal perplexed, and a little angry. He wished, if no one wanted this gold, that he could take it upstairs again to the chimney cupboard; or, if they objected to that, that they would at least give it to him, and let him go away now to that beautiful music he was to hear, and to those kind people who were always to understand what he said when he played. "Of course," ventured Perry Larson diffidently, "I ain't professin' to know any great shakes about the hand o' the Lord, Mr. Holly, but it do strike me that this 'ere gold comes mighty near bein' providential for you." Simeon Holly fell back in his seat. His eyes clung to the gold, but his lips set into rigid lines. "The money is the boy's, Larson. It isn't mine," he said. "He's give it to ye." Simeon Holly shook his head. "David is nothing but a child, Perry. He doesn't realize at all what he is doing, nor how valuable his gift is." "I know, sir, but you did take him in when there wouldn't nobody else do it," argued Larson. "And anyhow, couldn't you mean a kind o' IOU of it, even if he is a kid? Then some day you could pay him back. Meanwhile you'd be a keepin' him and a schoolin' him, and that's somethin'." "I know, nodded Simeon Holly thoughtfully, his eyes going from the gold to David's face. Then aloud, yet as if to himself, he breathed, "Boy, boy, who was your father? How came he by all that gold? And he a tramp?" David drew himself suddenly erect. His eyes flashed. "I don't know, sir, but I do know this: he didn't steal it!" Across the table Mrs. Holly drew a quick breath, but she did not speak, save with her pleading eyes. Mrs. Holly seldom spoke, save with her eyes, when her husband was solving a knotty problem. She was dumbfounded now that he should listen so patiently to the man Larson, though she was no more surprised than was Larson himself. For both of them, however, there came at this moment a still greater surprise. Simeon Holly leaned forward suddenly, the stern lines quite gone from his lips, and his face working with emotion as he drew David toward him. "You're a good son, boy, a good, loyal son, and I wish you were mine. I believe you. He didn't steal it, and I won't steal it either, but I will use it, since you are so good as to offer it. But it shall be a loan, David, and some day, God helping me, you shall have it back. Meanwhile, you're my boy, David, my boy." "Oh, thank you, sir," rejoiced David. "And really, you know, being wanted like that is better than the start would be, isn't it?" "Better than what?" David shifted his position. He had not meant to say just that. Nothing," he stammered, looking about for a means of quick escape. I was just talking," he finished, and he was immeasurably relieved to find that Mr. Holly did not press the matter further. End of chapter 18.